From the world of AV programming and control with James King, I'm Steve Greenblatt, and this is Ask the Programmer. James, how are you today? And I'm glad to be back for another exciting episode.
I'm doing good, Steven. How about yourself?
Doing well. If you haven't um, tuned in to our previous episode, please do. And we have our guests back who we both James and I both think very highly of, and also have gotten to know over the course of time. And she's somebody who's starting out in programming and is going to talk with us about her journey. She gave us some of her background in the last episode. Without further ado, it's Britt Yenser, and she's the AV manager at Northampton Community College. Welcome back, Britt.
Thank you so much. I can't stress enough how excited I am to be here because I have listened to Ask the Programmer for quite a while, and it was the one podcast I always kind of wanted to be on, but I was like, but I'm not a programmer yet, and I haven't even touched it, and like I don't know. But now that I finally started to start a programming journey, I reached out to James and was like, I'm a baby programmer now. Let me be your friend. And I'm really excited about this portion of your podcast because boy, do I have questions.
Excellent. Well, that's what we want. We always are out there looking, and thank you for reaching out. And you're always part of the community regardless, but part of programming doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually writing code. You could be doing other aspects that are touching programming. But let's I'll give you the stage. What are your questions that you have?
Okay, my first question is what what flow are you typically following in terms of design and then program? Are you designing as well as programming, or is someone else doing a design and then you take their design and you make it work?
So I'll jump in, Steve, here on this one. Coming from my experience, and I would say from the higher ed view of it, which will fit with Brit, is our teams are always small. We might have one programmer on our team who does it all, the design and the programming. So UI designs are very, like, you can get specialty in that. So it's definitely a skill. I was one who did UI and then went into programming because I would never call myself a UI designer because my UIs are probably not the best, but I got very simple with my UIs and I was like, all right, this is what I want the experience to be. And then throw the buttons on there and then have, okay, now I have these buttons or these commands, and then filled out how the system all worked.
My experience is a little bit different. I and this is why we have the show, quite honestly, is that the programmers come in so many different flavors. And one of the reasons that James and I paired up is because our backgrounds are different, but we speak similar language. I never was in front of the equipment unless I would go to a job site. So I first started actually working for a manufacturer for Crestron in the early days, but for the past 27 years, I've been an independent programmer, and what we were always a subcontractor and a specialist. So we would be given either specifications or designs, and we would be told, here's the way the system is been built. Now write the program, which is not always the best way of doing it because there's a missing piece there is the why behind the design and understanding what the expectations are and being able to define the functionality, which we had to take on as a responsibility. And so a lot of times we're looking at a design and we're piecing together, this is what we think it should do based on what the design shows. So it's a bit of a different approach to it. I don't know what it would feel like to actually design, but what I have had the opportunity to do was help to define with a end user how they wanted their systems to work, and then they specified the equipment to fit the functionality that they designed, which I thought was really optimal.
Hmm. Okay, that helps. That's so one, like I was talking about a little bit in the first episode, is I feel like James is saying, being in higher ed, you kind of become this jack of all trades, master of one or two. And I am in this journey of figuring out both design and the schematic, like how exactly does this go into a rack? What equipment am I choosing? Like what do I want a system to do? And then also how do I make it work? And I was wondering, like, is that the normal workflow? Are we all wearing all those hats? Or are there people who are like, oh, actually, I just do one part of that?
Again,
And
I think it's everyone's going to have their own way of doing it. Is it a normal workflow? I would say, Brett, knowing your background and where you're at, it's very similar to my small team. That might be a normal workflow where we're designing, getting the whole equipment. This is where they're going, where they go in the rack, wire diagrams, the elevations, all that stuff, and then going to writing the program. Or you might get into, like, say, large university, large scale, let's say, even like, I'm at the med school. I know UNLV main campus, they have a designer on team. They have a programmer on team. So one person's designing it, another person's programming it. So I think it all depends on your environment and what team you have. You might be a team of one doing everything, or you might be a team of 100 where you do a very small piece.
And that's part of why we love HETMA so much, right? Because we get to talk about that with other higher ed people and be like, what's going on with you at your place? Okay, well, thank you for that. It was really interesting to hear both sides and the different experiences. The other question I had was visual feedback, because that is the one piece that I struggle with every time. And the way I started getting visual feedback to be successful was actually just looking at other files that I had that were working, and I just kind of copied what somebody else did, which means I don't actually understand what I'm doing, right? Like I just saw like, hey, this has worked before, let me duplicate it. And to my credit, I understood how to duplicate it, but like I'm not really, there's something about that thought process of when you push a button, it turns a certain color that I don't understand. I don't know why I'm not understanding it. And to give you context, because I'm in the Extron stuff, I have the option, it shows you the button and it says in brackets underneath the button, like what the button would be doing, like if it's dim, if it's bright white, if it's red, if it's not lit up at all. And then you have to choose either inactive or active, or you have to choose on or off. I noticed that's not really consistent. And I don't know, man.
So I can share a little bit, and then we could go back and forth on this. One of the things to understand about programming, which is important, is that we can break it up into front end and back end. And James talked a little bit about that. So when you're working in the touch panel side, you have your user interface, and there's specialists that do that, and they're really the ones that kind of understand the interaction of the user and what's visually appealing, and what are the human elements that go into it. And then there's the back end, which is right, making sure that everything is going to work as expected. So that's just one thing to clarify. And then the other part is understanding, because what you did is perfectly correct. Is you based it on what had happened in the past, and that's really important, because there is no right or wrong. It's what the users find to be right that's important, especially in your guys' environment, where you have more of that direct connection, and you're responsible for a campus where, instead of doing one-off systems in different environments where you have to guide or define how things should work, you have a standard per se, or you have a historical information to go off of. Hopefully they've done it that way because the users have been happy with it.
Mhm.
So what you did is perfectly fine. And the last thing I'll share, and then I'll let James um, chime in, is the the user interface side of it is also meant to keep the users from getting themselves in trouble. So, so a lot of what you do is the programming isn't always just talking to devices and making things happen. It's managing the user so that they're not pressing a button a million times and overloading a buffer or sending too many commands or getting something out of sync. And the feedback, the feedback that I've been taught to be the most effective is when you're getting true feedback, so that you're lighting up a button when you actually know that the device is on or the source is selected, and that's very helpful. But James, why don't you share?
So, Steve brought up a lot of great points. Try to address your question. One directly is with the buttons. You can't go wrong, like Steve said. The key is be consistent. You know, if one room is, if you're turning on your display and you turn it red, and the next room is bright white, users are going to be confused. Users are smarter than we give them credit sometimes, as they'll start figuring things out. But we also got to be society bias in there. And this is things is like, for example, what do you do when you see the color red? You normally stop. That's just what we are trained to do in society. So I usually don't use the color red unless it's like, yeah, you're muted, or you're shutting down the system. Like, this is a hard, like, be mindful of what you're doing. Um, and then I use, like, if it's a select, which you get more options with touch panels over button panels, but like a select is either like a yellow. Yellow to me is like highlighting. It's what's selected, or I use the bright color on the button, like make the button light, because hey, this is showing me what it selected. And so again, the first part is always be consistent. So whatever your users are used to, that's what they're going to get accustomed to. Um, just then, try to get those society biases in there, like, hey, red means stop, green means go, things like that. And then you also try not to get too attached. It comes a little more in tail with touch panels over button panels, but I sometimes we get very invested in our designs, especially when you do it yourself and you put all that work into it and you put it out there and your users go, this doesn't make sense to me. You're like, but it makes sense to me. Like, why don't you understand? It's simple. Well, because we're close to it. So try not to get that attached. Like, I used to have the button where I was turning on displays would say on, thinking, oh, the users who go, I want the display on, I'm going to click the on button. And then it would turn off, the words would turn to off when they wanted to turn it off. And they're like, that's too confusing. I don't know what state it's in. I go, can't you just make it a power button like on a remote? And I'm like, sure. And I was a little like, I worked so hard on it. And then I'm like, you know what? It makes sense. It's like everyone knows what a power button on a remote is. So that's what it looks like.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You're making me realize I've been overthinking it, like drastically overthinking it. Um, and
We all
also,
do.
thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm remembering the workflow I used to have with Craig Underwood, who was on the show. He used to be my colleague and he was the programmer, and he would, when he finished something, he would call me over and be like, take off your AV hat, put on that old teacher hat, break it. And I was like, can do. You know? Just kind of identifying what, as an end user, like what I might think that things do, even though that's not what they do. And that helped him a lot. But at the same time, I'm thinking maybe that skill set is now tripping me up a little bit because I think I'm just overthinking it from the beginning.
And I think that's always a good thing. I used to do with my touch panel designs or button design, and I had a room working back in my sandbox. I would invite people. I would not tell them anything about the system. I'll go use it. I'm not telling you anything. I'm not telling you how to use it. Go use it and see how they actually interact with the panel. And if they can't interact with it correctly, if I have to give them a lot of direction, then I did a bad job.
That was going to be actually a suggestion that I had. It is twofold. Is one, sit in the back of a classroom and watch how the instructor, because it sounds like something that you would enjoy doing. And then the other is use your own system. How many people use the system that they actually have programmed? I'm a culprit of that as well. I don't think that I could tell you that I've used a system that I had programmed back in the day, and I think that that's a big mistake because we although we're a little biased and we know how it should work, but put yourself in a situation where you have to go into a room cold and act as the presenter and see how effective your system is.
Yeah. All right, I didn't send you guys this question in advance, so but I am curious as we're talking, because we're honing in on the fact that I'm new to this world, and so I'm wondering, what is something you wish you had done when you were first starting out that you're like, oh, looking back, I wish I would have like been better at this thing, focused on this thing a little bit more, or like done a certain thing so that I can do that since I'm just starting.
Anything, James?
You go on first on this, see what I think about it.
I'm, I was going to ask you to buy me some time. It's a good question, and I know that that's what people will say when they need time to think.
Yeah.
Um, the the thing that I'm not going to answer directly, because I have to think a little bit more. But what I will say is one thing that really helped me that I always did from the beginning was to document, almost write the user manual before you actually program the system. Because if you think about that, and you could write the user manual, then you understand how you want the system to work, and then you could actually program it to meet the user manual instead of making the user manual the afterthought, and then say and writing your code without a roadmap. We in my company, we have something we call a control specification, and what and it's basically a button by button description. A lot of people talk about that, where they define everything that system's going to do so we could get a sign off before we actually start programming. And I think it's a great tool, because if you can really define that, then writing the code is just a matter of learning that skill. The hard part, I think, is understanding what you want the system to do, and then the last part is really testing well, and testing as much as possible to understand that what you did work, because we tend to have biases when we actually are the ones that are writing the code.
I would say try to come up with a project of your own. And you and I both work in higher ed, we do classrooms. Yes, we're invested in our education, our students, but it's not like I this is Britt's project. This is the school's project. Um, I found, especially when I was learning the AV programming side of it, like I did the classroom stuff. I got that stuff banged out, but I had this idea. It's like, I want this done. And I was actually going to programming one class to learn programming, asking programming two questions based off the project I had in my own mind of, I want to achieve this that would make my life and my team life easier. So like having that idea was like, hey, here's a project. I want to do this. Like mine, I have a full limit. Like I wanted to build a dashboard that saw all the equipment. And I actually started making one. And so I was actually asking level 2 questions, programming questions in level 1, because I needed that higher end. I was like, hey, I have this project in mind. I want to be able to take this with it. And now that, because I had that in mind, I was like Steve said, I kind of had that where my pathway I wanted to go. And then I started diving into that and figuring out how to do it.
Okay. Putting these tips into my back pocket, writing them down later. At what point for you each individually, like what skill sets did you have mastered where you felt comfortable identifying yourself as a programmer?
I still don't identify myself as a programmer.
I, I used to be one and I'm not anymore, but I have a, but my background is in engineering. So, but it, I think you're a programmer now because it's about learning to think like a programmer, and I wouldn't get hung up on the complexity of what you do and how you and where you're at in your journey, because there's always going to be something bigger, more complex, more challenging to do. And if there wasn't, then it wouldn't be fun anymore. So I would say that you're a programmer already because you're passionate about it. And if you are thinking about these things, and if this stuff intrigues you even when you're not working, you're a programmer. That's those are the types of people that we always look to and say, if you like doing this stuff on your free time, you've got the bug.
I love that.
So, but thank you so much. I hope that we've been able to share some great insight, and we want you. I think the main thing to realize is that you're not alone, and that nobody knows everything, and that we're only a phone call away. And that's why we've worked on putting this community together, because we talk a lot about somebody being on an island, and that often happens with a programmer, because you may be the person, or maybe there's only a couple of people, and being able to have other people to bounce ideas off of and realize that we were all doing the same thing but in different ways is really powerful. So you can rely on Ask the Programmer for that. But thanks again for being with us, Britt Yenser. Talk a little bit about how we can get in touch with you about your podcast, Brave Space, and how to follow up with you to continue the conversation and help you.
Yeah, thank you again. Thank you guys for making this platform and all the ways to reach out, because it definitely makes me feel more comfortable on this journey. So I'm Britt Yenser. I am on X as Brave Brit. I am on LinkedIn as Britt Yenser CTS, and my podcast Brave Space and its practical offshoot Brave Skills are both on higheredav.com, as well as your podcast player of choice, essentially. If you follow Brave Space, you kind of get a 2-for-1. It airs every other Thursday, and then Brave Skills sneaks in there one Thursday a month in between the space airings. They both are about DEI and soft skills, so not necessarily technical, but the skills that you need to be a good human, a good manager, a good leader. And yeah, it's super fun. I encourage you to listen, and thank you for both of you for being guests in the past and for your support.
And in the spirit of Brave Space, thanks for being brave and being on here with us. So we appreciate you talking, and we look forward to having you back.
Thank you.
James, how could people get in touch with you, continue this conversation, and any parting words you wanted to share?
Again, thank you, Britt, for bringing these questions to our audience and us as we can address these. Hopefully we helped you out in some way and not to confuse you even more. Um, Parting words is definitely check out Brave Space, great podcast. I mentioned that the last episode. Follow Britt and everything she's doing. If you still inclined to get a hold of me, I'm on X at AB_James King. I'm on LinkedIn. Again, Google me, you'll find me.
Excellent. And for me, you could find me on social media at Steve Greenblatt. My company, Control Concepts, is at controlconcepts.net. And we are supporters of the podcast and help programmers to get their projects done by building the components that are needed to either interface with products or to do some advanced functionality or features that would take extra time to do on your own. So we can check that out at controlconcepts.net. As we mentioned earlier, we have a group on LinkedIn for Ask the Programmer, and it's a way that we bring our past guests together. We also are trying to spread the word about what we're doing and build a community so that programmers can interface with each other, similar to HETMA, which I have always taken a lot of liking to and admire. And it's it's just a good way of us being able to help each other, and the programmers need to amplify their voice. So we're looking to do that as well. We could find that on LinkedIn at Ask the Programmer, and just join in and chime in on your conversation. Let us know what you think, and help Britt with some of, if you have more answers to questions, feel free to share those. And you could find this podcast on YouTube and on your favorite podcast player in the audio version. And until next time, this has been Ask the Programmer.